Hi scholars! For today's read aloud, we are going to read a nonfiction text that tells a little bit more about what life was like the year the Titanic sank. Our first section is about social classes in 1912. People in 1912 were very aware of their class. That is where a person fits in society. Class is determined by family background, wealth, education, and other things. On the Titanic, the price of a passenger's ticket said a lot about that person's position in society. Running a giant machine like the Titanic required more than 900 workers. Among them were 9 officers to supervise the crew. There were also 390 stewards and stewardesses to serve the passengers. They were kind of like the waiters and waitresses at a restaurant. They came around and served drinks and made sure everything looked clean. There were also 289 firemen, trimmers, and greasers. They carried and shoveled coal into the boilers and greased the ship's moving parts. Seated at far left is Captain Smith. So here's Captain Smith. He's the captain of the ship, which means he's the one that's in charge. That's his captain hat right there. The White Star Line spent a lot to make its first-class rooms as fancy as possible. They had thick carpets and overstuffed sofas and chairs. First-class passengers could use a gym, swimming pool, and squash court. Afterward, they could relax in a Turkish bath and read in a library. So here's a first-class ticket, and it says ticket price $1,500 to $4,350. Because of inflation, that means that money was worth a different amount back then than it is today. In today's money, that would be $26,741, or all the way to $77,549. Oof, that's a lot of money. So down here I see there's quotation marks, which means that this is something that somebody actually said. It's a direct quote from them. And down here it says who said it. Survivor Lady Lucille Duff Gordon, a first-class passenger. And this must be her picture. She said, "My pretty little cabin, with its electric heater and pink curtains, delighted me. Its beautiful lace quilt and pink cushions and photographs all round. It all looked so homey." Here is a picture of a first-class gym in the Titanic, and you can see this guy is on a rowing machine, so it's like you're rowing a boat. So this would be like the paddles, and they're probably weighted, so they're heavy, and you have to push them, and that's his workout. And I don't know what this guy's doing back here. The press called the Titanic the Millionaire Special because there were so many wealthy people traveling first class. Their combined fortunes were around $500 million. That would be $10 billion today. Among the rich and famous people were the following. So these are all famous people back in the day. This guy's name is John Jacob Astor. He was a New York millionaire, and he was on the Titanic with his wife, Madeline. He died, but she survived. That's probably because, remember in our story, the sailors were saying that the lifeboats were for women and children only. So he probably had to stay behind on the ship, and she must have gotten on a lifeboat. This guy's name is Archibald Butt. He was a military advisor to President William Howard Taft. when he died. Isidor and Ida Strauss. Remember at the end of our story, the author was writing about a day she was taking a break from her story and went to New York City with her son. And then they went into a park, and she saw written on a marble plaque, there was a sign saying that the park was dedicated to Isidor and Ida Strauss. So that's this guy and his wife. He was a founder of Macy's department store. Both of them died. Scotland's Lucy Noel Martha Dyer Edwards. She was the Countess of Rothes, and she survived. It says she was a countess, which means she was part of the royal class in Scotland. Scotland is a country that is north of England. Titanic's second-class rooms were as good as first-class rooms on other ships. Most second-class passengers were professionals, teachers, doctors, and businessmen. Their rooms were simple but attractive, with mahogany beds and linoleum floors. Second-class passengers also had their own library and many other beautiful public spaces. So here it shows a second-class ticket. It says the ticket price was $65, which is around $1,159 in today's money. Here we have another quote, and this quote is from survivor Ruth Becker. She was a 12-year-old second-class passenger on the Titanic. And there's her picture. She said, "Everything was new. Our cabin was just like a big hotel room. It was so big. The dining room was beautiful, the linens and all the bright polished silver you can imagine." So this must be a picture of the second-class dining room. And it's in black and white, but it must have been very colorful. Most third-class or steerage passengers were poor people leaving Europe for a new life in the U.S. Their rooms on the lower decks were spare. However, the Titanic had private rooms for 2, 4, or 8 people. Many other transatlantic liners had steerage rooms for 40 people. So even their third-class rooms were a lot nicer than any other boat that was crossing the Atlantic at that time. It's saying that other transatlantic liners, that means other boats crossing the Atlantic Ocean, they had rooms for 40 people inside. So you didn't have your own private space. The Titanic had private rooms for 2 people or 4 people or 8 people, which is nicer. This says for a third-class ticket, it was $36 back then, and then in today's money, that would be around $642. So still pretty expensive. Steerage passengers came from many different countries. In fact, the ship carried people from 24 different countries. During the early 1900s, immigration to the U.S. rose a lot. Immigration means people who are coming from other countries and coming to the United States to live there. So in the 1900s, the number of people coming over to the United States rose a lot. A lot more people are coming. So shipping companies like the White Star Line, the one that ran the Titanic, cashed in on it. On average, a ticket on the Titanic cost steerage passengers 2 months' pay. That's a lot of money. Fatal flaws. The Titanic could carry up to 3,547 people, but it only had 16 lifeboats and 4 collapsible boats with canvas sides. They could only save 1,178 people. At that time, British laws said that the Titanic had to carry only 16 lifeboats. By carrying the 4 collapsible boats, the Titanic was actually carrying more than the law required. So the law didn't require you to have enough boats for everybody. They only had enough for a small part, not even half of the people aboard. So here's a Titanic timeline. In March, the builders put the finishing touches on the Titanic. And then on April 2nd, the Titanic completes its sea trials, so they must have tested it out on the ocean. And then it sails from Belfast, Northern Ireland, to Southampton, England. On April 10th, the Titanic's maiden voyage begins in Southampton and ends in Cherbourg, France. When a ship has a maiden voyage, that means the first ever voyage. So the maiden voyage begins, and they went a short distance from Southampton, England, to France. On April 11th, the Titanic leaves Cherbourg on April 10th, and it arrives at Queenstown, now called Cobb, Ireland, around noon on the 11th to pick up the last of its passengers. Around 1:30 p.m., the Titanic departs for New York. On April 13th, the Titanic gets the first of 7 ice warnings from other ships. So they must be going along a path across the Atlantic where other ships also go. And so other ships are sending warnings to the Titanic saying, watch out for ice coming up. And it says the first of 7, so the Titanic received 7 total warnings about the ice. When we come back for Read Aloud tomorrow, we'll read the next section of our nonfiction text called Disaster Strikes. So this must be about the night the Titanic hit the iceberg. All right, scholars, I'll see you tomorrow for Read Aloud.